went to multi-six figures in 90 days, from like 4-figure months to multi-six figures, and have sustained that. I was holding on tightly to control, and I knew I had to get out of healthcare. It was a toxic environment for me. It wasn't serving me mentally and emotionally to be there anymore. And I just had this pull to be in hypnosis, and I learned to let go of control. Service is about being in your heart and doing it for the sake of helping someone, not for what you can get out of it. And I just think that is so important, because when you show up with that pure intention, people notice. People are going to judge you. If you do everything perfect, you're going to be judged. So you may as well go do what you want to do and live your life.
You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This is another episode where I'm interviewing a former TCP, Transformational Coaching Program student. Her name is Penny Chiasson, and we're going to chat with her about all the changes she made in her life when she started transforming her life from the inside out. So, Penny, thank you for being here today.
I'm excited to be here. I really just can't express enough how much I want to share with what being in your world has done for my life, because it's been truly transformative, and everybody in my family knows your name. They know who Jim is.
And they probably get tired of that, but tell you what, let's dig into that. So let's go here first. How did you find me?
Well, that was a fluke. I had reopened my business in January 2018, and I had heard about Marie Forleo's B School, and I discovered all these Facebook groups around entrepreneurship. Imagine that. And I came across Jill and Josh Stanton, and they hosted you for a webinar. I signed up, didn't get to join live, but I kept getting the replays. And the third time I watched the replay, even though I had been telling myself, I know this stuff is all familiar, I said, you know what? Clearly, I meant to be here. So the third time I watched the replay, I pulled the trigger and signed up.
Yeah, I want to dig into that. And you know what's funny is James Wedmore once said to me, he goes, Jim, a lot of things you say I've heard before, but I didn't really know it like I thought I knew it until I worked with you. And then when I worked with you, I actually came to know it, recognizing that I only understood it in the past. And then when I came to know it, that's when I started transforming my life. Would that be a fair statement for you?
You stole my line.
Sorry about that.
But that's exactly what I was going to say. Knowledge isn't anything if you don't incorporate it, experience it, and embody it, and develop that knowing around it.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is I'm getting to a place in my life where it's, for example, like, I don't even know this is a good example, but like an American president, like the current one, he can do whatever he wants because he's not worried about re-election like a lot of different people. They're wanting to be reelected. So they'll just say they'll do whatever, only as a metaphor. But you know, what you just said, I have said over and over and over again, and so many people just don't get it. And that you can listen to a podcast, I don't even care if it's mine, and I know mine is a good one. You can listen and listen and listen, but listening is one thing. Being able to embody is a completely different ball of wax. And if you can't embody what you're listening to, then it's really not of a great value. And here's the thing. We literally obviously can't see through our blind spots, so we don't even know what we're missing, and we don't even know that we're missing things when we're trying to change our life. So I added a little bit more upon what you said, but thank you for saying that, because so many people think that listening is enough, and it is not enough. Let's dig in here. Of course, I know your story, but I don't know all the specifics and details. What were you doing for a living when you enrolled in the very first TCP?
I was a full-time nurse anesthetist at a level 1 trauma center, and I was building my hypnosis business on the side, and I had closed my business for several years, so that was less than a year old at the point that I joined, and that was the reason I joined, because I didn't know how to think like a business owner, like an entrepreneur, and I didn't know where else to start. And you really kind of hit on that in the master class or the webinar that you did about the higher perspective. I still remember that image of New York City and the higher perspective. That really sticks out for me. But that's where I was. I was 39 hours a week in the hospital, probably 20 on the business. And for both of those, I had 3 hours commute round trip each day.
Interesting. Talking about the higher perspective, that is in the Be to Have series coming up in about 3 to 4 weeks, I think, later in early in March. And I was looking at the slide deck, thinking about what I wanted to add, what I wanted to pull out. And when I asked people what was their biggest takeaway from module number 1, people said the higher perspective. And for me, it was just filler content. I just put it in there to put something in there. But people are like, wow, when I got a higher perspective on life, that changed everything for me. Okay, let's fast forward. That was 2020, I believe. Is that correct?
It's September 2018.
Was it that long? I've known you that long?
You've known me that long.
Gosh, I did not recognize that. Where is your life? Okay, because people will say, well, okay, that's taken her 7 years. Where were you in 2020 with your business after we met? So 18, 24 months later.
Well, I was full-time entrepreneur, and I can attribute that to TCP. Because I was holding on tightly to control, and I knew I had to get out of healthcare. It was a toxic environment for me. Yeah. It wasn't serving me mentally and emotionally to be there anymore. And I just had this pull to be in hypnosis, and I learned to let go of control. And probably in July of 2019, I felt like I was riding a wave, and I was cresting a wave. I could not explain it. I didn't know what it was. And then there was a moment that you and TCP were a part of that my life changed in a matter of minutes. And so from the moment of letting go of control, like when I fully got that and I let go of control, in less than 6 months, I'd handed in my resignation.
I remember when you did that. And, I say in TCP all the time, control is an illusion. And when you get into control, you're controlled by the illusion of control, right? Right. And the amount of people that try to control things, of course, you know the name because he's in my community, James Wedmore, a good friend of mine. He was making $2 million a year when I was coaching him one-to-one. And within 18 months, he went to $10 million a year because he had learned to let go of control. So would you say control is one of the biggest limitations for a lot of people?
It is. And speaking of those blind spots you mentioned earlier, if you're not careful, those things sneak back up on you and you will slip back into that habit of control, which happened to me a little over a year and a half ago. And it has been a journey because it was at a much deeper level than I had realized. And of all things, you think you'll learn the lesson, and then here comes the 2x4. It was tied to money.
Tied to money. That's a big one. What was that aha moment, if you remember, in TCP where you're like, oh my gosh, I am controlling things, and this is how I went about letting it go?
Ooh, that was in May of 2019. I was working on the abundance piece, and that was when you first started bringing some hypnosis, subconscious reprogramming into the program.
Yeah.
And it was around the idea of insurance. So my husband has a chronic condition, and the medication is very expensive. It's more expensive than the insurance premiums. And so I had gotten hung up on this needing to control his access to healthcare, the medications, and something that you had said, I don't remember exactly what it was like, how do I find this place where I can be aware of the things I need to do to make sure, forget that word, the things I get to do to make sure we're supported and cared for without putting my attention on it and letting it expand or grow. I just really dove into having the awareness without being attached to it. And maybe this is what it was. This is what's coming for me. You've said many times that being attached to our expectations or attachment is the source of unhappiness. Yeah. And somehow that came into play in that whole piece of control. So being able to look at those things and remind myself, you are okay. Everything works out.
Which something I said in TCP, and I think at some place you reinforced that you got it when I've said everything always has been, is now, and will always be fine. And
Yeah.
something sticks in my mind that you brought that to my attention and said, I have awareness of this now. I understand what this means now, is that it's always going to be fine, no matter what happens.
And that's true.
Very true. It's 100% true, but so many people will say it's not true because they work from, oh my gosh, if this happens or that happens or this happens or that happens, my life's going to be horrible. People are going to laugh at me. I'm going to look bad. I'm going to be this. It's all control, every bit of it.
It is. And one of the things that I often say and I remind myself is it's going to be fine. Everything is now, always has been, and will be fine. That doesn't mean it's exactly the way you wanted it.
Right.
So it's a fine line, but it also doesn't mean it has to be terrible either. We're resourceful.
Exactly. And you know, it might not be what I have found, it might not be the way that you want it or had it, but I also have found in my own life, you can completely reinvent and make it even stronger and better than what it was when you thought it was fine. But we hang on to things so prevalently and we won't let things go that it's hard to bring new things into our lives. Is there a comment you want to make on that? You're grinning.
I just, the one thing that you taught that I have embodied into everything that I do is identity. And you cannot be who you want to be clinging to who you are now, what you're attached to now. I mean, some things move with us, but not everything. And I remember a story that you told, and I have my own examples of this story of the woman that you worked with. I think her father was an alcoholic. You tell that story often.
Robin from Dallas 20 years ago. Yeah.
If you do more than just listen to that and you really think about it, that is a powerful story in and of itself.
So people are going to want to know what that story is. They're like, why didn't you tell the story? The story is this very quickly. I worked with a woman, she was in her mid-60s, and she said, I can't sustain relationships because I am the adult child of an alcoholic. And I said, where did you hear that? She goes, my therapist told me that. And I said, when is the last time you saw your father? She said, when I was 18. And I said, how old are you now? And she said, 48. And I said, that was what is that, 40 years? Or I don't know how many years, 40 years, whatever. And I go, that was decades ago. And she's like, oh my God, I never recognized that I've been carrying that story. And I've identified it as somebody who could not maintain relationships. I've carried it for decades and been lonely, but I haven't seen my father in 40 years. And so many of us do it. And no one's ever mentioned, like you have right now, that they really got the gravity of that story, but that is true. It's all our identity. And what we are at an identity level is exactly what will happen to us. Money. How did this affect your money in the first, let's say, from 2019 till 2023 or 4?
The transformation, well, I mean, it was everything. When I first got into TCP, I didn't feel comfortable charging. It was social worker mentality where I was demographically. I'll let that define it. But going full time in my business, I got to do a lot of work around that because, as you know, it's not the same as having that paycheck come every 2 weeks.
Right.
But I mean, I went to multi 6 figures in 90 days, from like 4-figure months to multi 6 figures, and have sustained that.
Question. How did that happen?
Service.
Working from
service, I can tell you unequivocally, if at any point, if I looked at my numbers, my schedule, if at any moment my energy flipped to, I'm not going to make my break even for the month or anything like that, the minute that energy flips to, how do I close another client? Right. How am I going to make up the shortfall? It's like a house of cards. You can't operate a business. Well, I mean, you can, but you'd be far more successful if you don't operate your business from that place. That was
Yeah.
huge. And not working hard for money, the less you do, the easier it is. It's not anything I was ever taught for
And that,
sure.
what we teach is a lot of contrarian, but yet things that most people have learned, we've learned from our parents, and everyone thinks that way. And then they wonder why they struggle. Let's touch on that for a moment. I can't tell you the amount of people and the amount of people listening right now that will say they listen to the podcast because they want more in life. Every single time I offer TCP, even though I analytically say when you work by circumstance, you will repeat your circumstance. It just doesn't register. It just does not register. So they keep, and with respect, they keep
Yeah.
coming back to the Be to Have series and then wondering why is nothing changing? What would you tell somebody, a friend of yours, that said, I really want to do something. I want to work a gym or whatever, but I can't afford it. What would you tell them?
I can't afford it. What can I do today? Like, who can I be? And what can I do that will allow the space for that to flow into my life? Because it doesn't always look the same for everyone. But when I want to do something, I ask myself, how can I create an opportunity for this to flow in and be a match for it? Of course, most people wouldn't get the energetics yet at that point. But when we operate from the I can't because, you just can't, you don't get ahead that way.
Nothing changes that way at all. And talking about that, and I was there many, many years ago in my life, is I can't do X, Y, Z because of money. And I always worked from have, do, be. If I have or had more, I could do more, and then I could be successful. And obviously, what I teach you guys in the Be to Have series, you've got to be before you can do, before you can have that success. That's backwards the way we're taught, but the way we're taught does not work. So, what are you doing today?
What am I doing today? Well, I'm still running my hypnosis practice. I have reintroduced trainings, and that's where we're focusing our attention now. I'm only one person. And you said this to me once. I love doing my one-on-one work. And you told me you're never going to be able to scale one-on-one.
Yep.
And, you're right. There's limits to that. And I'm looking at how can I have the biggest impact on the most people with what I've learned, because everything I've learned in TCP has infused everything that I do, from the identity work to the letting go of control to helping people to shift the victim-like thinking that they don't even see they're there, because most people would not view these people as being in a victim state. So it's about increasing impact, and that's where my focus is these days. And that was a huge lesson for me last year, talking about circumstance. I periodically slipped back into that, and it took a lot of participation and responsibility on my part to shift out of that and to just allow myself to once again become comfortable in this new space of being really uncomfortable for the vision that I have.
Yeah. Let me add there, and you've been around me for a long time, and you know that tact is not my best suit. I just tell it like it is. Here's what I see. And if you like somebody who's direct, you're not going to like me. I get that. I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. But, when you use the V word, victim, so many people say, you kind of seen it, or maybe saw in TCP, where I'm like, you're completely in victim mentality. And people are mad at me because I'm telling them they're in victim mentality. And later, when they really look at it, they're like, oh my God, I was in victim mentality. Would you say now that you do a lot of coaching, because I already know the answer to this, but I'll ask you your opinion, would you say that there is a significant amount of the population in victim mentality and they don't even know it?
The majority of the population. I mean,
I
just look.
I didn't
look at
choose that word intentionally because I didn't want to, but it is that.
Yeah, but just look at the political landscape. I don't care what country you're in. When you give your ability to feel safe, secure, and cared for, when you hand that over to an ideology, a religion, a political party, your employer,
An economy.
exactly, that is putting yourself at the whim of something outside of you. This
Yeah.
giving away your personal power, which means that you're subject to whatever this external thing decides or does, which makes you a victim. And people don't like that. And sometimes I'll still catch myself saying something, I can't because, or I didn't do that because, and I'm like,
Yeah.
nope, 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 stop.
We're no different. I've been in this field for 30 years, and I've caught myself going, whoa, okay, you're making interpretations, Jim. Back up. I'll ask myself, are you in victim mentality in this moment? Victim mentality is also blaming the economy, blaming Biden, blaming Trump, blaming whatever, blaming Putin, invading Ukraine, and that affect commodity prices, and that's it's blaming something. And when we're blaming, we're not responsible for our life. And in that moment, that relieves us of responsibility. Why? Because I'm blaming you or someone else. I don't have to own that when I'm partly co-creating here, and I don't own it. You had mentioned also, and you absorbed it because actually I'd forgotten until today, I introduced you to one of my very good friends, Virginia Cook. And she's the one who taught me about the true value of service. What can you share with listeners about the value of service and business?
Well, service is about being in your heart and doing it for the sake of helping someone, not for what you can get out of it. And I just think that is so important, because when you show up with that pure intention, people notice, they feel seen, they feel heard. And, people talk, if you're in business, people talk about you, whether you realize it or not,
Oh, I know that for sure.
whether you want to embrace it or not.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who's not of service, people are going to hear that. So it's just in your best interest to operate from that place. And then whatever happens, you can feel good about what you're doing. And that's just a vibration in and of itself.
Yeah, let me thank you for that. Let me ask you a question, because you seem, which I think I knew, but you seem to have a really good grasp of the processes and what we do in TCP. Fear of judgment. What do you want to add? Because there are so many people listening that are so afraid that if I start a business or I put myself out there, people are going to judge me.
Oh, people love to judge. It's the pastime. When you decide to take ownership of your life and your future, people feel threatened by that. Either they have their own experiences where they have judgments around people with money and business owners, or it's something they've never had the courage to do themselves and they don't understand it. For months, my mom would ask me, so how's your little business doing? When are you going back to work? I had to stop talking to her about it because it would hear that. But people are going to judge you. If you do everything perfect, you're going to be judged. So you may as well go do what you want to do and live your life. And that's one of the things that was just reinforced time and again in TCP. You may as well live your life. People are going to judge you anyway. So where that comes back to me is when you have true unconditional self-love, when you trust yourself to be resourceful, when you really do that, not perfection, but when you're consistent with that, what other people think simply does not matter.
You nailed it exactly as I say it. No matter what you do, people are going to judge you because people are making machines. So why not just go do what you love to do, because you're going to be judged anyway. And that's just the way the world is. You've used this word twice now, and I would love you to share your perspective on this. There are so many people that, and I don't think I'm judging. Partly sometimes I want to pull my hair out because I'm like, when are they going to get it? But then again, in fairness to anyone that I've worked with or even people listening, Don Javier, my brother-in-law, who you've met and may have done some work with, I also have compassion for him because all the people that he works with, I'm sure he's like, when are they going to get it finally? Including me, when are they going to get it? I mean, for crying out loud. But the word, and I think it's an extraordinarily powerful concept, and I'd love you to share anything you want with people listening, resourcefulness.
Oh, I love this word. Resourcefulness is about knowing that you don't have to have the answer, but you have the ability to, I don't know, follow your intuition, connect with someone. It doesn't mean that you have to be 100% self-sufficient, but that you have the ability to open your eyes to opportunities and explore things you never thought of before. So being resourceful means allowing yourself to be curious and see where that goes. My business is built on resourcefulness. The first time I built a business, it was built on resourcefulness. I just didn't know what it was back then. So basically, it's trusting yourself to figure it out.
I just don't follow social media personalities. I know who she is by name. We have some mutual friends, but I don't follow, no disrespect, none. I just, Maria Forleo, you had mentioned. And the one video, and I've only watched one of her videos, which is like a 1 minute reel. She said her mother taught her, whether or not this is true, everything is figure outable. And that to me is resourcefulness there's one thing you missed, I think. Money. When people want to do something and they don't have the money, that's when people stop. And that's when we have to be resourceful. Okay, I want XYZ. How do I figure out a new way to be to create that? A good friend of mine, I interviewed her here maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Wow. Shama Hyder. Shama has hundreds of employees, social media maven. She advised the White House. LinkedIn, I think, calls her one of the top 10 marketing experts in the world. And she said to me one time, we were talking, where most people fail is when they hit a wall, they will not be resourceful. They will hit a wall and they will stop. And she said, I don't stop. I will figure out how to make something happen. You said there are several things you wanted to share. Just what comes to mind about things you've not plugging TCP, but concepts you've learned that people can benefit from this that are listening? What are some things that you're like, wow, when I got that, it shifted everything?
One of the things that you said that sometimes I describe as the cold, wet fish across the face is that you're 100% influence of the circumstances of your life. And basically that means we can choose what we think and how we feel. So basically we're in charge of what our life looks like.
Yeah.
We can have two similar situations, and the two people in the same situation, one looks at it negatively from that victim mentality, and the other one's in this resourceful mindset or solution-based mindset. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they just know how to be at peace, and that's a stretch. When we went through some of the homework, and you would talk about how would you feel if you already had it, and that is a muscle that I continue to build. How would I feel if I already had it? And to be able to be in that place, because it's our emotions that will take us over and pull us down. What I've learned is, going back to how we open this up, it's about becoming the person who lives that in life, not just listening to it and, oh, that's great, that's wonderful, yeah, I like that, I believe that, but to actually live it.
Become it.
Yeah, that's what
Be exactly
being,
how you're being.
And be do have being.
Yeah.
For some of us, especially for me growing up in the rural South, in my early 20s, something kept telling me, I have to leave, I have to get out. So leaving Mississippi and going to New England gave me a whole different perspective on life. And sometimes we need to change something in our life just to get that different perspective, because if we continue to think the same way and we don't give ourselves an opportunity to have a different perspective, then we're never going to have it. So I would say for anybody who's just going through life and it's more of the same and you're not satisfied with the same, do something different. Just get curious about life. You don't have to pick up and move or quit your job and start a business. Just pick one thing.
When you say do something different, doing comes from our way of being, because many times we are being fearful. And when we're being fearful, we cannot do something different. How would you tell someone to get through that? Meaning to work their way through from the just, I'm paralyzed with fear, to the doing.
So if you're feeling paralyzed with fear, I would, and I've said this to people that I've worked with and friends from TCP, think about something that you've always really enjoyed doing. Maybe when you were much younger and you don't do it anymore, and get curious and just allow yourself some space to do something that's familiar, but you enjoyed it. Because fear comes from our thinking and our state. If we can break that emotional state even for a little bit, it gives us the opportunity to be in a different energy and to see things from a different perspective. The other thing you have to do, and I know you said like not to plug TCP, but this is the root of everything. You're not your thoughts, you're the thinker. Your thoughts, the master thought formula. Just simply choose a different thought, and it's rooted in neuroscience. Yeah. Wherever your attention is for 17 seconds, it begins to gain momentum, and if you can stay there for just over a minute, you can shift the state. You can do anything for 1 minute. Anything.
Yeah, that's a big one. And that applies to me like everyone else, is if I'm not feeling well, I'm agitated, I'm whatever it might be, it comes down to one thing. Where is my attention? Because that didn't just happen arbitrarily. My attention is somewhere. And a phrase we use in this household regularly is move your attention. And that was a big one, because when we were building the house, I mean, it was really first world problem, but it was a challenge. It was really draining to build this house. And we often had to remind each other, move your attention. Forget the fact that they're working on the back deck literally at 4 a.m. in the morning. Move your attention. And you'll find more power when you recognize and you master moving your attention off from what you don't want and moving it to what you do want. Okay, so what else do you want to throw in here? Because I want to talk about hypnosis and you and your business, but what else is there another thought, something that you learned in TCP that helped you build a business, improved your relationship, your money, or your health?
I'm going to go with relationship for a moment, because I think this is something almost everybody listening could relate to. When I was back at the hospital, this is in 2018, again, those 3 13-hour shifts.
Yeah.
If I was on consecutive days, I had less than 8 hours at home to sleep, get a shower, eat, that kind of thing. I would come home at the end of the 3 days, and both kitchen sinks would be piled with dishes.
Oh.
And I went into TCP one day, and I did a post, and I was talking about how it just like really irritated me, because I was basically looking for help how to shift out of it, because every time I come home, it's like I have all these dishes to wash. I mean, he's one man. This is where my head was. He's one man. It's one meal. It's maybe a plate, a cup, and a spoon at home. Exactly, because I chose to retire him.
Yeah.
And let him work on the farm in part-time. And you came back to me, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of what you said because it's not my story to tell, but what it boiled down to is there are people who would love to have someone in their home to dirty those dishes for you to clean.
I remember
And
that.
it showed me where my attention was. My attention wasn't on gratitude that I have this wonderful soulmate. It wasn't on gratitude that I have a house that's paid for. Granted, it's my childhood home, but, grateful that I have food to eat off of plates and plates to eat off of and the hot water and the soap to wash them. Like, I have all of this stuff, but I was focused on this one little thing that, for whatever reason, I felt like, I don't know, was it stealing my time? Was it disrespect? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was feeling at the time, but I think almost everybody listening has something in their life that they're focusing on, that one little annoyance, and not the 99.99% of beauty and abundance that's around it.
That's beautiful, because in TCP, we do a week on choice and triggers. And when we're triggered, triggers are our biggest gift. And when we're triggered, which you were triggered, literally in that moment, as we talk about in TCP, you were judging. You were judging him and condemning him, et cetera, et cetera. And then you would get into your anger, frustration, resentment, whatever it was about that. And I remember what I told you was that, and I'm just going to be fully transparent, I learned that in college from believe it or not, of all people, Dear Abby. When I was reading Dear Abby, this woman said she used to be triggered by her husband leaving his dirty socks on the floor, and she was sick of it. And one day he had a massive heart attack and he left the planet. And she goes, what I wouldn't give for him to have his dirty socks back on the floor again. It was such a trivial thing that I got into. And then what we can't do is, when you're in your anger, you can't have a constructive conversation with the person about, okay, let's resolve this so it doesn't happen anymore, because you're in your anger, your resentment, your frustration, you're tired and everything else, and everything melts down. Now you got to fight in an argument with people. So you've been there before. Let's talk about something that scares a lot of people for whatever reason, the H word, hypnosis. So I've been a hypnotist for, I don't know, about 28, 29, 30 years now. And as best I know, it's one of the safest ways for people to create change in their life. So what do you want to share? Because you're working as a full-time, you're working as a full-time what?
Hypnotist. I call myself a success alchemist. I bring that higher perspective and wisdom from shamanism into it as well. But yes, a hypnotist and trainer.
What kind of people, what would somebody come to you for?
Most people come to me because they have that self-awareness and realization that they're in fear they don't need to be in. They want to trust themselves more. They want to stop doubting themselves and basically getting in their own way. Like, they have that level of awareness. So when it, like smoking, weight loss, I don't do that. I don't do that stuff. I help people who know there's a better version of them and they want to be that person. So it's identity level work through and through.
When you have direct influence over your life.
Yeah.
What's funny is I remember somebody in TCP in 2019 saying that phrase really impacted me, is that I have influence in my life. And ironically, I ran into her yesterday in Whole Foods, Jennifer. And she said, when I heard that on your audio, I never looked at it, that I literally, I have influence in my own life. And why I segue there is because that's in the audio WOM, the Workshop of the Mind, which is a hypnosis audio in TCP. Now, when you were in TCP, you were doing one-to-one prior, correct?
Yeah, it was all one-to-one.
Yeah, what are you doing now? Is it group?
So I do some exclusive one-on-one. I've started a membership. It's an Audio Vault membership. And then I have Inner Circle, which has twice monthly calls where basically I coach people using conversational hypnosis to come into that higher perspective in the 3D and some spiritual aspects of it as well. And then I have the training program.
Why do you think so many people are afraid of hypnosis?
I think because of the common myths, the whole Hollywood aspect of mind control, not remembering. And you often hear people use the words like put under, put
Right.
you in hypnosis. And if someone is not willing to allow themselves to be guided into hypnosis, you're not gonna go in, because we have a protective mechanism in the brain.
Right.
But hypnosis is natural.
Right. When you're
It
driving and
happens
you
all the
almost miss
time.
your exit, you're in hypnosis. Yeah. No
Yeah.
one puts you in hypnosis, but people think
Mm-mm.
they're going to be controlled. And I tell people, if that were true, then how come you're not reading every day where somebody was hypnotized and gave someone else their PIN number and they got wiped out because they were what they
Yeah.
call under hypnosis as opposed to being in hypnosis?
Yeah. I once had someone call, and I used to be a certified registered nurse anesthetist. I let that board certification go because I wasn't practicing
Which
anymore.
scared you?
Oh my gosh, that was a biggie. That was like letting go of a tree branch and
Security.
trusting that the ground was only 6 inches beneath my feet.
Yeah.
It's like the person drowning in water when if they just put their feet down, they could stand up. It was totally about that. But I had someone call me in my office in Jackson, and they wanted to know, well, do you use medications for hypnosis? And I'm like, no, not at all. That's not what it is. And probably the other thing is, it doesn't matter. They can be people who've worked with other hypnotists, and then they come work with me, and I'm talking to them at the end of the session, like, I heard every word you said. I'm like, well, of course, I told you would be aware of everything. You would hear my words. And we just have these preconceived notions. And I attribute a lot of that to stage hypnosis, because the classic command at the end of any stage hypnosis. Yeah, but at the end of any show, they give the suggestion you're not going to have any memory. And that's just the out, so that when people's friends are harassing them from doing weird, crazy, wild stuff, they can say, oh, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah.
It's
an extremely effective tool for change and transformation, which is why we use it inside TCP to work on the identity. Okay, a couple more questions here, then we'll go to the secret podcast. Number one is, did I tell you what to say today?
Absolutely not.
Love that inflection. Were you paid for your time today?
No.
Absolutely not, right?
No.
And then finally,
for my time.
People say often, I don't need to work with you, Jim, and TCP. The podcast is enough. What's your thought on that?
Until you're in it, you don't know. Because I thought I knew it. When I watched the webinar, because I was a hypnotist, everything, a lot of the concepts around thinking and shifting thoughts and perspective, that was all familiar to me.
Yeah.
And when I went in, I wasn't prepared for all the layers that were going to be peeled back. So, a podcast is listening, but being in a room with people where people are being coached, and maybe they're speaking up and asking a question that you hadn't even realized was something you could shift in your life, and hearing them be coached and seeing yourself in that, plus getting your own questions answered. There's just a podcast can't be a substitute for that.
Yeah, it's like I tell people, would you rather me tell you how to ride a bike if you want to become a champion bike rider, or would you rather me put you on a bike and coach you to a world championship as your coach? Apples and oranges. That being said, let's wrap up our time today. Where can people find out more about you, Penny?
PennyChason.com, or I'm on all the social media platforms.
PennyChason.com. Spell that, please, for them.
Penny, Penny, like the money. Chason, Chiasson.
Perfect. And I'm going to say this. I have coached hundreds of hypnotists. And in my opinion, you're someone that it would be to their benefit to give you a call. I believe in your skills and I believe in your ability. And thank you for sharing with us today, Penny. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.